Here is example 1. Very sharp video. Here is example 2. Another sharp video. Here is example 3. And then this is example 4. And trust me, you're gonna want to stick to the end of this video because example 4 is the most easiest to achieve because you don't need any sort of equipment at all in order to record such great sharp videos in detail. And spoiler alert, this has absolutely nothing to do with the type of camera you're using. To the professionals watching, sharpness do not necessarily mean cinematic. So it's just a matter of preference, but I do know a lot of people also just prefer sharp videos. After all, it is video we are talking about, not film. With that out of the way, let me show you the first example. After showing you these 4 examples, I know you're wondering, especially for those of you who haven't yet figured out exactly what this technique is. So it begs the question, what is this technique? Let's say, for example, this is our background and this is our subject, and this is a 2D plane arranged in a 3D environment. When we slide to the side, we realize that these two are 2 distinctive layers. We have the subject and the background. Now let's rewind back to the normal view. Since we are treating this as 2 separate backgrounds, we would realize that if we dim the brightness of the background just a little, the subject begins to look sharp. It is because we have different brightness level. The subject has a different brightness level, and then the background has a different brightness level. However, this is also combined with the blurry background, which most people associate with the word cinematic. Why is blurry background cinematic? And here is the answer. It is because bokeh or background blur most often try to separate the subject from the background, and once you have this form of separation, that is why this sort of look is mostly associated to the word cinematic. But keep in mind that cinematic is a very controversial word which has been trivialized these days on YouTube because a lot of things come together to make a shot cinematic. So like everything in filmmaking, if you can combine more than 1 or 2 techniques together into something, then you tend to get a very powerful result. And it is this same technique I used in this particular shot of this woman. As you can see, the exposure on her is different and the exposure on the background is also different. She is way brighter than the background. Anytime you can have a background at a different exposure level or brightness level and the subject at a different level, the subject tends to stand out against that particular background. Now, apart from just the brightness level, you can take this to a whole new level by including color or using color to try to do this whole separation. Now, I know this is just the ideal world or the ideal situation that we are displaying here. Now, in real life, for example, in this shot, I went around scouting this location to look for a place where the woman will easily be lit with natural light somewhere, whilst the background we are shooting against has a little bit of a darker tone. So as you can see over here, we are shooting towards this angle where you can see that the background over there is darker than where she is seated. And then, of course, we cap it all up by just using this reflector over here. This is not required in this shot, but of course, this is just an overkill. What he's holding here is just a reflector. And without it, the shot would have still passed as okay. But since this was kind of like a semi-professional set that we added it here. And then what is happening is that it's reflecting the rays onto the side of her face, and as you can see from the final footage over here, you realize that this side of the face is a little bit brighter than this other side, and all this is geared towards creating separation. The more we can create this separation, the sharper the image is going to look. Once again, this has nothing to do with the type of camera you are using or the lens you are using. This is example number 2, and as we can see right here, this is our subject, and we are using a lot of the techniques in conjunction with the layering, but everything specifically is layering in this particular case. So what is happening here is that if we look closely, we are using the background blur to, in this case, just isolate our subject completely from the background. And what is happening is that we actually have a reflector, as you can see from the BTS scene. This guy is holding the reflector from this particular angle, and what the reflector is doing is that it is actually pumping some lights onto this side of the face, which means that we are going to have a little bit of darkness at this side of the face, and all these things are geared towards kind of like helping us to create that kind of separation between the subject and the background. Now, what is fascinating about this is that if we had just filmed this directly against this white place, then because our camera doesn't record 10-bit, or let me say the camera isn't as powerful as we would have wished, then if we shot it against this white background, then it's going to be very difficult to see her, because her color or her skin tone is going to be competing with the sky. So this is where knowing your equipment and playing to the strength of your equipment comes in, and not to the disadvantage of it. I intentionally shot her against these particular buildings, so even though they are out of focus or they are blurred, because they are of different colors, or at least they add a little bit of different patterns, so shooting her against those patterns makes sure that she stands out instead of just shooting her against a plain white surface, which in this case is the sky, which the camera could not retain the details in there, once again because the camera is not as powerful as I would have wished for. But once again, context is important, because before this particular shot would come in the final video, there's a drone shot of the space, and there are some other shots showing that we are in this kind of African village. This is the technique that we employ to get this particular shot, and there are so many other examples within this day of shoot, and we use that same technique to do most of these shots that you see on your screen right now. Let's talk about example 3. Now, in this particular example, we got to the place whilst it was already midday. So, do you remember this particular reflector when we used it during this first shot to reflect some of the sun rays to this side of the woman's face? Now, in this particular regard, we decided to change how we were using this reflector. So now, instead of reflecting light, we took off the inner part of this reflector, which is just the white part of it. And then what did we do? We whisk it above this subject. So we place it slightly above her. And as you can see in this particular shot, I intentionally cut this particular area where we can purposely see that the reflector is almost trying to appear in this side of the shot. So that is exactly the distance in which we whisk it. And what it was doing was that instead of having the direct sunlight blasting on her, this particular thing is kind of like trying to diffuse the light before it hits our subject. So because of that, when you look at the light hitting her, it is very soft and looks very smooth, and this is what also helped to give it that kind of polished look, and thereby helping us to make sure that the subject is very well lit. Now, still on the concept of layering, since it's running through all our shots, you realize that I intentionally decided to shoot her against this particular background. Once again, you realize that the background, because of the shade at the background over here, it looks a little bit darker, and then on her, because we are diffusing the light coming on her, it looks a little bit brighter than the background. Once again, we have a brighter subject placed on a darker background. So when you get to a location, when it's practical, try to look for that particular angle where you can shoot towards those shadow sides. However, I know this is just the ideal world. Once again, there are some cases where you are shooting and then you have to purposely shoot towards a side because you need something in the background and all that. When you get to those kind of cases, maybe there's nothing you can do about it. But hey, if you can make any changes or decide to switch the angles from one side to the other, these are things I would suggest that you always think of very carefully before you take that necessary decision to change your angle. Now to the point of the video most of you beginners have been waiting for, and in this particular case, the example number 4, which I already mentioned that you do not need any sort of equipment to create this kind of a look. So what am I doing here? Once again, layering is in place here, or let me say we are using the layering technique. So if you realize or look very closely, this subject speaking here is at a different brightness level, and then the background as well is also at a different brightness level. Once again, bright on dark, we end up with a well separated image, and once the image is well separated, we end up with a sharp image. Now, how are we getting the light onto the subject? this is what we are doing. So I intentionally pushed or brought the subject closer to the edge of this building. It's just to have the inverse square law in mind. This means that when somebody is closer to the light source, the brighter the light source is, and if they are far away from it, the darker it is. So since we are lighting this scene with just one source of light, which is the sun, I decided to move the person closer to the periphery, that is just this particular side, which means that the sun is hitting this particular side or hitting the floor, and then straight away everything is bouncing back to the subject standing here. So all this are bouncing to our subject who is standing at this particular side at the moment. So basically that is how we are lighting the subject. So it means that because this background is far away from the subject, it is not getting enough of the sunlight, or these rays are not able to penetrate all the way through to the back. Hence, this is something that you can think about doing in your particular location. So it is not about having the reflector or having any other equipment. You can also always look at having other surfaces where the sunlight or the main natural light can reflect on and then bounce back onto your subject. Now there are other limitations with this, of course. If the background, or let me say where the sun is hitting, is not quite a white surface, then you may get some form of color shift or some weird colors happening. But if you are in luck and where you find yourself there are lots of white background or white surfaces, then trust me, it is actually a technique that you can use always to rebounce light onto your subject. And as you can see from the final video, it creates that kind of very fine look on the subject. Once again, it becomes a very large light source, hence we have a very smooth looking image in this particular regard. Now, one of the things that could have easily given this shot away was the fact that because this particular pillar is also very close to the periphery or very close to the source of light, you realize that a lot of the rays are able to hit it. So when you look at the final video right here, you realize that the pillar is as bright as the subject because they are distant or they are almost perpendicular to each other at that same particular side. So this is just the limitation of it, but hey, anything else that will help to make our footage very sharp, that is what we are actually going out for. But please take everything I say here as just talking about techniques that are devoid of the type of camera, the type of lens you are using, because trust me, at the end of the day, in shooting sharp videos, the type of lens you are using and then the type of camera you are using, and as to whether it is 8-bit, 10-bit or all those other details would actually impact exactly whether you are able to get sharp images or not. But in this particular regard, I decided to do this video devoid of anything that will require you spending a lot of money. I hope you did get some value out of this video, and if you did, I'll do much appreciate it if you do click on the subscribe button. Please make sure to do turn on the post notification bell so you are notified anytime I drop awesome content like this right here from the continent of Africa. And if you are interested in learning how to shoot movie scenes, click here to watch this video as I teach you exactly how to do that. Until next time, as always guys, keep practicing filmmaking. Peace out.